my, oh, there we go.
Sorry, I forgot she was going to say that. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, there you go, Jen. No, that's perfect. I'll start over. Wait for Jen's audio to connect. Perfect. So, like I was saying, Michael's been my personal coach, business coach for over a year now. And when we hired him, he said we could use him for business and personal. So I definitely took advantage on the personal side of things, especially when I was going through like my third breakup with my ex-boyfriend, and I was complaining to Michael about things that happened to me during the relationship. And part of those things was my health. My sleep got impacted, my mental health got impacted. So my health was impacted by this relationship. And as I was complaining, Michael at the end went, "Oh, so you have a problem setting boundaries." And that was the first time that all that complaint and all the things that happened to me like came back and turned around on my end, that it was my inability to set boundaries, and that's why these negative things happened to me. And that was the first time I ever became aware of that. No one's ever taught me to create boundaries, and I didn't realize how many different people are going to feel different things when it comes to your limits and what you want and what you expect. So since then, I've been learning a lot from Michael, and I've even dug into other books and relationship books of how to be in the relationship with people, not just romantically, with family and friends. And I thought that this was a perfect topic for him to talk to you about when it comes to protecting your me time, like having your wants and needs around your health, around your me time, and how to protect that from friends, loved ones, family members. So that's my intro on why I wanted to have Michael come on. So I'm going to let him take the stage and introduce himself.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that intro, Lucy. Hi, everyone. It's so good to meet y'all through Zoom. I guess this is how we meet people these days still. It's so good to see you. Thanks for having me, Lucy. And I love this topic. I'm so glad Lucy asked me to do this because, like Lucy, no one was really taught how to do this, right? This is not a thing I learned in school. This is not a thing I even learned in college. I had to continue to learn as an adult what it meant to set boundaries in my life and do a lot of personal study. So I'm excited to share what I know with all of you and give you some really simple and practical tips for setting boundaries in your life in a way that helps you kind of live the life you want to and get people to treat you in a way that you deserve. That's what we're going to talk about today. Before I dive in and share my slide deck, I want to just play a quick little name game. I'm going to ask you to use the chat box. All I want to know is, in the chat box, can you just share with me one word that describes how are you feeling today? Just one word that's a feeling word that says, how are you feeling today? There's no wrong answers. This is not a gotcha moment. I'm just curious, where are you all at today? How's everyone doing? I'll even start by going first. Hi, I'm Michael, and my word for today is I'm feeling a little dizzy. I'm feeling a little dizzy. I live in New York City, and we have reopened New York City very quickly. My business has reopened, life has reopened, and I'm feeling a little dizzy by all the change that's happening these days. So I'm coming to today's workshop feeling a little dizzy. Ruth says, flustered. Ruth's feeling a little flustered. Gotcha, Ruth. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, who else? Let me see in the chat box. One word that describes how are you feeling? Dave, feeling a little overwhelmed. I feel you, my friend. I'm right here for you. Overwhelmed is it's a feeling we need to feel sometimes. hopefully it's also balanced with some feeling of underwhelmed. Teresa's also overwhelmed, so you and Dave, you're in the same boat. Phyllis, bringing us all up, feeling happy. Thanks, Phyllis. we have balance in the group. Thank you. Lucy's feeling excited. Great, awesome. I'm so glad. Thanks, Lucy. Vicky's feeling a little anxious. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Vicky. You're perfect just the way you are. And Jennifer here is feeling sweaty. It is a hot day. I don't know where you are if you just did a workout, Jennifer, but it is in the 90s here in New York. I just heard also that Seattle is going to reach like 100 degrees today, which is the hottest it's ever been in Seattle ever, which is crazy. So, and last one here, Mary Beth. Mary Beth is feeling flustered. Teresa, how to stay on record. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing your flustered self here, Mary Beth. I hope this is an hour worth your time. So thanks for playing that game, my friends. I really appreciate it. I'm going to dive into a slide deck. Before I do, just one more thought about me. Just hi, my name is Michael Keeler. I mentioned I live in New York, working with Dave and Lucy for the last year. I'm a husband to my husband, Andrew. I am an entrepreneur that's owned businesses for over 10 years. I'm a business coach and consultant, which is how I know these two. And I'm a wannabe organizational psychologist who's back in grad school trying to learn as an adult. And so that's what I'm up to. This is one of my favorite topics. And I'm going to dive into my slide deck here. And let me see, can I share this? And Lucy is also going to share this slide deck with you by email after our presentation today. So don't feel like you need to write down every single thing I say. You will have this slide deck afterwards to refer to, but you might want to take some notes for yourself. And at one point in our presentation, I will be asking you to get out a notepad or your phone or something to write down some notes. So if you have something to write on handy, that'd be helpful. At the very end of our very short time together today, I also am going to be doing some breakout rooms so you can talk to each other. Yeah. So I will end on time. We were scheduled to go for 1 hour, so we'll end in well, already it's been 10 minutes, so we'll end in 50 minutes. At some points, I might talk fast, but if you need me to slow down or repeat anything, feel free to just unmute yourself, or you can write in the chat box your question. Lucy will be patrolling the chat box and will be stopping me if you need me to slow down or go slower. Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's dive in. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about creating boundaries to support your self-care. And I'm going to give you very specific actionable steps for what it means to set boundaries. And I want to make sure that you all really can practice this after today. So we are going to take some time actually you practicing the skills I'm giving you today so you can actually start setting better boundaries in your life that help enhance your self-care. Here's our agenda. I should mention this slide deck has a lot of unicorns in it. My consulting business with my business partner, Mark, that's him there, nude in front of the unicorn. That's Mark. The business is called Business for Unicorns. So we have a lot of unicorns all over the place. I hope you like them because you'll see a lot of them today. So here's our agenda next to a nude Mark. We're going to talk about what the heck are boundaries? What do we even mean by setting boundaries? We're going to talk about why set them. Why learn this skill? Why is this important in your life? When will you set boundaries and why does it matter? The bulk of our talk today will be about the 3-step WIN process. This is a very simple acronym to give you very simple 3 steps to learn how to set successful boundaries in your life that applies not just to setting boundaries with people you work with, but people that you are in your family with, people you live with, people that you're friends with, people you're not friends with, any place in your life where you want to set boundaries and teach people to treat you differently. This 3-step process will come in handy. I mentioned we will do a little breakout room at the end if there's time, so you can all have a conversation about how to apply these skills, and then also leave some time for Q&A if you just want to ask me questions at the end. Sound good? If that all sounds good, can I just see a thumbs up from everyone? Just want to see a thumbs up. Awesome. Got the approval here. Crush it. Let's move on. So tell me in the chat box here, what are boundaries? There's no wrong answer. I just want to hear your thoughts. What are boundaries? It can be a simple definition or an example. There's no wrong answer. Great. Lucy's in first with a thought here. Your limits or expectations. Yeah, that's a great big part of this, Lucy. Part of set boundary setting is knowing what your limits are, both positive and negative, how far you can be pushed in one way or the other, and expectations of yourself and others. Great. Ruth says, black and white, not gray. Yeah, great, Ruth. That's a big part of it is where are you being black and white, very clear about expectations, and where are you being gray about your expectations for yourself and others? Dave says lines not to cross. Yeah, great way. The image on the screen is giving you that definition. That's great. So this is where you set lines, do not cross. I often think of it as everyone knows the film Dirty Dancing, right? That this is my dance space. This is your dance space is a great example of a boundary. Yeah. What are the thoughts here? Jennifer says self-protection. Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. Phyllis, priorities and limits. Awesome. That word limits comes up again. Fantastic. Teresa says letting others know how you want to be treated. Yeah. Fantastic, Teresa. Yeah, that's awesome. Teresa, are you related to Lucy in any way? I figured it out. Great. So you're all right. Those are all absolutely part of it. Here's a very simple definition. Boundaries are clearly stated expectations for how you want to be treated, well, how you want others to treat you. I can't even read my own writing. How you want others to treat you. So Teresa, you were spot on to the way I define it. I also go on to say that creating boundaries requires a few things. It's not just enough to know what the expectations are that you want to set, but creating boundaries requires a vulnerability to set the expectations up front and candor to maintain it. Yeah, I'll say that again because I think this is really important. It's not just enough to know what the boundaries are you want to set, because we all might know where our boundaries are, but it's important to be vulnerable enough to tell people this is how I want to be treated. This is how I don't want to be treated. That requires vulnerability, and then it also requires candor to let people know they stepped over a line, that they didn't actually meet your expectations, and they need to get back in line to treat you how you want to be treated. Those are both really hard, and our kind of the win process I'm going to teach you helps you do both. A famous lady who I like a lot, many of you might know, Brene Brown, talks a lot about boundary setting. If you don't know Brene, go check her out. Google Brene Brown. She's got great books. She's got a famous TED Talk, and she is a social scientist and researcher who studies vulnerability. And one of the things she says about boundary setting is daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. I think that's so powerful because when I talk to people that I work with on a regular basis as a coach about setting boundaries, so often they don't set boundaries because they're afraid of disappointing others. And so a really great benchmark for yourself is, do I allow that fear of letting people down hold me back from asking for what I really want? Do I let that fear of letting people down hold me back from asking them to treat me in a way that I deserve? Yeah. And that's very common. If that's true for you, you are not alone, my friend. Most people are stopped by that exact thing. Yeah. So with that idea in mind, I want to kind of move forward with a few kind of a few more thoughts about why setting boundaries. So it's very clear what boundaries are. We just talked about it. Telling people how you want to be treated. It involves both vulnerability and candor to do it. And it requires real courage also to do it, because you have to be able to do it even when you're afraid of disappointing people. And so just a few more reasons why it's also important. One is to practice self-care and self-respect. Right? All too often, people treat us in ways that don't honor us. They don't honor our time. They don't honor our contribution. They don't honor our knowledge. They don't honor our age. They don't honor our anything we want to be honored for. Sometimes boundaries are there to make sure that you are treated in all the ways you want to be treated, which can be about protecting yourself, taking care of yourself, leaving work on time so you can get to the gym. Saying no to those friends who always want you to go out for drinks so you can stay home and have a healthy dinner. Whatever the self-care habit is that you want, boundaries are often a way to help you get there. And often if you find yourself not living the healthcare habits you want to, there's often a boundary that is missing. Yeah, so that's one thing that's really important about why to set boundaries. Number two is it communicates your needs. Lucy was just talking about this in past relationships. Was she looked back at them and realized that I actually saw a pattern of me not being treated the way I wanted to be treated, and it's because the expectations weren't clear. It's either, and we don't know. I don't remember what it was, Lucy, but you can jump in if you want. It was either she didn't have the courage or vulnerability to set the boundary in the first place, or maybe she did sometimes, and then it just got rolled over again and again. There wasn't enough candor to keep it in place. And both of those are going to happen to you all the time. There's no such thing as setting a boundary once and never having to talk about it again. It's very rare. And so this is something that has to be watered like a garden. Yeah. Another reasons about why is it helps you make time and space for positive interaction. So you can show up in your life as your best self. You can show up in your life as your best self for your family, for your friends, for your coworkers, for your fitness community, when your boundaries are being respected. Yeah. When your boundaries are being respected, you are in a space that we often call a psychologically safe space, where you can show up and take risks, be your bold, audacious, fun-loving self. And when your boundaries are not being met, you can't show up for others in positive ways. You can't honor time and space for positive interactions if your boundaries are not being met. The last thought I'll give you here about why is that it really helps to set limits in a relationship in a way that is healthy, right? Because often in the absence of boundaries in any relationship, coworkers, loved ones, the absence of boundaries often leads to conflict. And constant conflict in a relationship is exhausting. I'm sure we all know, have experienced being in a relationship that just took so much work and was full of so much conflict, so much turmoil. And often that was because one or both parties did not set and maintain clear expectations for one another. Boundaries were constantly getting stomped on. And we often talk about that, like, that person just doesn't respect me. The person just always stepping on my toes. They're never listening to me, right? These are all examples of phrases I hear all the time with my friends and family, and they're examples of boundaries not being set. Yeah. Any questions about all that so far? This is all just laying the foundation for what's coming next. Cool. So let me just move on here and ask you to do this in the chat box. Let me just ask you this question. What I mentioned a lot of this already, so you can also just repeat what I just said, but what for you personally makes boundary setting hard? Yeah, what for you personally makes it hard to set boundaries with others? Again, no wrong answer here. I just want to hear in the chat box from you. How do you think about this for yourself? How do you personally struggle to set boundaries? I'll give you a second to think about it. Type something in. What makes setting boundaries hard for you? Yeah, Dave, thanks for starting off with a great one. Yeah, just the fear of conflict. Many of us are just very conflict averse. We just want to avoid conflict at all costs. So we're willing to let ourselves be stomped on. We're willing to let ourselves be pushed aside and pushed around, just because we don't want to make any conflict. We don't want to rattle the cages or mess anything up. Or the other part, Dave, here is hurting feelings. I just don't want them to hurt their feelings. They didn't mean to treat me like that. That's just the way they are. Right? I did this for a long time. I lived with my grandfather for much of my life. And because he was my grandfather, I just didn't want to hurt his feelings and tell him I was offended when he'd make jokes about gay people. So I just didn't for 30 years because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. And, that was a choice I made. Lucy says, fear that setting the boundary leads to conflict. Yep, just like Dave, that's a great example. Teresa says, fear of anger, fear of rejection. That's a great one, Teresa. Fear that if I set this boundary, this person won't want to be my friend anymore. If I set this boundary, this person won't like working with me anymore. Great examples. Jennifer says, don't want to be perceived as difficult, don't want to hurt people. Yeah, that's another one, Jennifer. If I tell people how I want to be treated, they're going to think that I'm difficult. They're going to think I'm hard to work with. They're going to think I'm high maintenance, right? That's that label everyone wants to avoid. It's hard to say no. Yep, that's a great one, Ruth. We're going to talk more about that. Phyllis says, letting someone down. Yep, that's exactly right. Similar to hurting their feelings, just disappointing them by telling them how we want to be treated, or that the way they're treating us isn't working. Yeah, and Vicky says a lot of things. Fear of disappointing others, being rejected. Yeah, these are all incredibly common, my friends. And so I'm hoping that throughout this process I'm about to show you, that that we can help overcome all of those, and you can start to build up the courage to be vulnerable and push through and set a boundary in spite of all these things, in spite of the fear of rejection, and in spite of the desire to say yes all the time, in spite of the fear of letting someone down, that you can do it anyway. So let's keep going. These are all great examples. So I want to talk a little bit about the two paradigms that I see. And actually, who was it? It was Ruth who pointed at this. There's often two ways that people approach boundary setting. And usually boundary setting comes up when people ask you to do something that you want to do or not. We have people who say just yes all the time because they fear letting people down, fear disappointing people, feel hurting feelings, or people who say no all the time. And both is not sustainable, right? Just always being a yes person, not sustainable. Always being a no person, not sustainable. Here's what tends to happen if you're someone who says yes all the time to people and asking things of your time and energy. Often what happens is you do it because you want to please others. The minute you say yes to something you don't want to do, you have resentment about it. And over time, you've said yes enough and built up enough resentment that you're totally burnt out. It's a burnout or a breakdown, and you've had enough, and you finally get the courage to say no. Yeah. So you say yes, yes, yes all the time. You say yes to others. Yes, I'll do that for you. Yes, I'll do that for you. Oftentimes, I'm sorry, ladies, but the research says ladies do this more often than men, right? You want to give, you want to help, often have nurturing kind of spirit, and so you want to please others, you want to help others, be supportive of others, and oftentimes there's just a slow resentment building to the point where you have to just say no, eventually. And then saying no all the time is an equally unsustainable pattern. So if you just say no all the time to people's requests of your time and energy, what will happen is you'll have guilt about it immediately. I said no, but I feel really guilty about it. And that guilt will build up into this kind of shame spiral of, oh no, they're just not going to ask me anymore if I keep saying no. So eventually you just start to say yes again. And the same pattern persists. So saying yes all the time and saying no all the time are just not sustainable approaches to how to balance out your boundaries. And it's this big figure eight that we do. We say yes all the time until we're broken down and have to say no. Then we say no all the time until we're broken down and have to say yes. And there's a better way. There's a better way. And so let's talk a little bit about the boundary spectrum. This is I think my last slide before I give in. I'm going to go into the action steps that you can all take. So on the spectrum, on one side of the boundary spectrum are really rigid boundaries. These are the folks who say no all the time. And again, this isn't sustainable for the reasons listed here. If your default answer to someone asking for your time or energy or expertise is always no, this is not going to be sustainable for the reasons I mentioned. If you want to, and these people tend to be protective of their personal space and their personal information. They tend to keep others at an arm's length distance. They tend to avoid asking for help. And they try to limit their need for vulnerability. This is, I can do it myself. I don't need help from others. I'm not going to help others. I can do this myself. I'm my own person. And that, isn't wrong all the time, but if it's the only way you're operating, it's just really unsustainable. Same thing is true at the other end of the spectrum, that if you have really fluid boundaries where you're always offering yourself up, that when anyone ever says anything, you're always the yes person, that those people tend to be people who also overshare their thoughts. They overshare their feelings. They're too open to others. They're so available to others that they're in everyone's business all the time. They're so open to others, they require lots of validation from others. And they're so open to others that they have this rejection, the fear of rejection from saying no. So they just always live in that yes space, no matter how hard it is for them. And what we're working toward and what our win process will help you do is have some middle ground here. What balanced boundary setting looks like is that every time there's a request of your time or energy or expertise, that you thoughtfully consider every request individually for its own merit, its own value, and its own context. Yeah, I have a psychologist who's a mentor of mine, and she always loved to say, the context is decisive. And what she means by that is Lucy asking me today to do this workshop for you all had a context. Well, she really asked me like a month or two ago. But a month or two ago, the context for me was like, that sounds like a blast. I adore Lucy. I'll do anything for her. I actually have time during the time she wants to do it. And the context that time was I thought about it. I thoughtfully considered it. And I said yes, based on the context. If Lucy would have asked me this week that I've been crazy busy and I came into this meeting feeling a little dizzied and the next few weeks of my schedule look a little crazy, I probably would have said no. The context was different. But what happens is we fall into these yes or no buckets. We don't stop to consider each request in the moment, in the context that it exists. Yeah. So finding balanced boundaries in your life means considering each one, thinking about the context of the request, and it doesn't compromise my self-care, my values for others. Maybe it's a no, maybe it's a yes. And I have to also be okay, if I want to balance boundaries, with being told no. If I'm going to say no, I have to be okay with being told no. And that creates a relationship where it's okay for everyone in my life to treat each other in a balanced way. Any questions about all this so far? Any questions about rigid or fluid boundaries, balanced boundaries? I know this all seems maybe a little academic, but I just want to give you a framework to hang on to before we dive into the actual action steps. Lucy, do you have any questions? I know you love this stuff, but yeah. Okay, great. Well, then let's continue. I want you to write this down. You can do this on your computer or on a piece of paper, but you're going to need this for our conversation in a few minutes. I want you to write down one boundary you would like to set in your life right now. As of today, what is one boundary you'd like to set? What is one place in your life where you want to teach someone how to treat you that is different than they've been treating you? Yeah. And for bonus points, if you'd like to, how will you take a balanced approach to setting that boundary? Yeah. So thinking back through the last slides that we talked about, not always saying yes, not always saying no, but considering the context of the request and what's being asked of you. So I'm going to give you about 60 seconds, or maybe a little more, maybe 90 seconds. So it's a very short period of time, but I just want you to just write for about 90 seconds, answering the question: what is one boundary you'd like to set right now for yourself? And what is some way that you are going to make it a balanced approach? Put 60 seconds on the clock. I'll try and be quiet for a whole 60 seconds. You're doing great. Keep on writing, about 20 more seconds. All right, friends, start to wrap it up. You're going to have more time to go back to that in a few minutes. Does anyone want to share one or two things? What something you wrote down in the chat box? And you want to share an example of a boundary? You don't have to if it's personal or private, but if anyone has anyone as an example to share, feel free to throw that in the chat box. I see Lucy typing, so I'm going to wait for it. There it is. Great. The amount of time I want to spend communicating through text is at a minimum. Great, especially with people I'm dating. That's a great example, Lucy. That what I want to do is I want to set some boundaries about how I'm communicating with people via text. I want to get that number down as little as possible. So anyone who requires me to communicate with text, I need to set a boundary with them. So that's a great one. That it's focused on people you're dating, but I'm guessing lots of other people text you as well. And so you want to think about how to set boundaries with multiple people. Great. So what we're going to do, friends, is give you a very simple 3-step process to setting boundaries that could apply to any area of your life. We're just going to dive in. So this is the WIN process. It's a very simple, kind of cheesy acronym, WIN, and it stands for these 3 steps. 1 is to write down your needs. So you already started step 1. I'm going to give you some more detail about how to do that in a little bit more thoroughly. But you already started that by writing down a boundary you want to create. The second step is going to be to initiate a candid conversation. I'm going to tell you what that might sound like. And the N stands for navigating resistance. As I mentioned, it's very unlikely you're going to set a boundary once and never have to talk about it again. So you have to navigate how to keep that boundary in place over time. I'm going to dive into each of these in a little more detail. When it comes to the W, when writing down your needs, here are some questions I encourage you to consider. You can jot them down, but again, you'll have this slide deck. And this is really the first step I recommend to setting a boundary is really journaling, is really writing down the boundary you want to set, just like you started to do for those 60 seconds. You can also do this if you wanted to with a trusted friend or colleague or coach, is actually just articulate out loud the boundary you want to set, which is basically, what are your needs? What do you need from the other person? So the questions I want you to think about are things like this. What do I need right now from this person that I'm not getting? What is currently in my control to change? So is there anything I can do about what I'm not getting that I don't even need to ask them for? What specific behavior or behaviors would I like this person to do more or less of? So in some cases, a boundary is asking someone to do this a little more, support me a little more, call me a little more, ask me out for friend dates a little more, or a little less, right? I need you to actually not bother me so much. Don't text me so much in the middle of the night, right? So the behavior could be more or less. Another thing to ask yourself is, what is it costing me personally by not having this boundary? I don't mean money. Lucy, I'm going to put you on the spot. Unmute yourself and tell me, what do I mean by that question? What is it costing me personally?
Well, for me, it was my health. I was letting my sleep go because
Yep.
the person I was dating was 3 hours behind, and he had to
Mm-hmm.
talk to me at 9:30, and that was my bedtime.
Yeah, great. So the cost is the kind of often the labor you're being asked to do, often emotional labor. Sometimes it's like get up and text in the middle of the night labor, but it's the thing that it costs you, the energy, time, life force that it's costing you by not having this boundary in place. I know for me, when I have certain boundaries that get crossed, I waste a whole half a day or day being upset about it, or angry about it, or bitter about it, or resentful about it. And so for me, crossing some boundaries has a real cost to me, like losing a day, a whole half, a whole or a half a day. So you really want to get clear on what is it costing you to not have this boundary in place. The last question I would love you to consider when you're doing this is, what is the ideal outcome I want from creating this boundary? So let's just say this person agrees to creating this boundary, not texting me in the middle of the night. What I hope to get out of that. And to Lucy's point, often I want that cost back. Right? I want my health to be better. I want my time management to be better. I want our relationship to be better. I want my sleep to be better. Sometimes I want my bank account to be better by setting this boundary. So really getting clear about what the ideal outcome is. So that's really step one of this win process, is write down your needs, get clear about it. That can look like journaling, like you just started to do, and it can look like talking to a trusted friend, colleague, coach, to get out in conversation about what your needs are. Any questions about step one? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat box. Great, I'm going to keep plowing through. Number two is to initiate a candid conversation. This is the part where you have to have some courage, get vulnerable, and talk to the person. And there's some best practices here. Ideally, when you're setting a boundary, it's face-to-face. Please don't try to have these really important conversations by text. You can have them by phone. That's okay. It's better to see faces. You all know, you've all heard the stat that something like 70, 80, 90%, depending on the research you look at, of communication is nonverbal, right? So when we only have voices to go off of on the phone, or not even voices to go off on text, we're missing most of communication. You need to see someone's face, their expressions, to really have a conversation about these topics. Number two is ensure there's privacy, there's no distractions. You don't want to have this conversation in your workplace where you're in an open cubicle and anyone can walk up at any time when you're in the middle of this conversation. You want to practice in advance. If you're someone who's nervous about having these kind of conversations, practice with a friend, practice with a coach, practice with Lucy and Dave. You also want to make sure that you acknowledge any nerves up front. So one of the things I like to do in conversations where I'm feeling a little nervous and vulnerable, I'll say up front, like, hey, Dave, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today, but I do want to acknowledge I've been really nervous about this. I've been thinking about this for days, and I totally have butterflies in my stomach right now. So if everything doesn't come out perfectly, just know that I'm doing my best, and this really matters to me, right? That really helps set the stage for making sure that Dave hears what I'm about to tell him as well as he can. So there's some best practices for our candid conversation. Here are the steps. There are a few steps, I think, in this conversation. One is defining your needs. I'm going to go through these in more detail in a second, which we already talked about. You have to have done the W before you get to the I, right? You need to have written down your needs before you can do this next thing. The next thing you do is get consent, which means this person is ready to have this conversation with you, and you're not the only one ready for this conversation. Step number three is ask for what you want. Actually lay out what your request is. Number four is address any concerns. Talk to them. This is a little bit like a negotiation. It's a little push and pull. Can they meet you where they're at? Can they do what you want? Or is there some version of what you want they're going to start with? Number five is set some consequences. Be clear about, well, if this boundary does not get in place, here's the continued cost to me and how that might play out over time. Yeah. So those are the 5 steps. Let me just give you some language to use when you're having this conversation. So in step one, that's when you write it down. You do this before the conversation is write down your needs, have those notes in front of you. The second thing when you're getting consent is say something like, hey, Lucy, there's something I want to ask you. Is now a good time? So that Lucy can say, you know what, it's not a good time. I'm in a crappy mood. You don't want to talk to me right now. Can we talk tomorrow? Or I'm running into a meeting in 2 minutes. Is it only going to take 2 minutes? I'm like, nope, it's actually going to take longer. Let's do it later. So getting consent is really important because you want someone who's as ready for the conversation as you are. Step number 3 is asking for what you want. From now on, what I'd really like to have happen, Lucy, is for you to show up to the meetings we have one-on-one on Wednesdays, like really on time and no later than 2 minutes after, right? That's a very clear request of a new thing I want Lucy to do. That's fake, by the way, that Lucy's always on time, for me at least. The fourth thing I want you to do is share, ask for them some feedback. So what could get in the way of this happening, right? You're asking for them, I'm asking you to show up on time. What could get in the way of you showing up on time for me? What makes that hard for you? What are the challenges? Can we talk through that? Right? Maybe it's not 2 minutes, maybe it's a 5-minute window of when we can start, but it needs to be more on time because it feels like it, which gets to the last part, which is if this doesn't happen, I think the consequences will be, I just don't know if we'll be able to keep working together if you can't be on time for our meetings. It just feels like a real waste of my time. And I don't want to build up resentment for you because I'm always waiting 15, 20 minutes for the meeting to start. Yeah. So the consequences might be that, like, I don't know if we can work together in this way anymore. Yeah. Any questions about that? It's pretty straightforward, but this is just an outline. It's our roadmap for what a candid conversation might sound like. There are a million and one ways to have this conversation. This is just one, but I think it's a good one. I think it's a good roadmap that if you do those 5 things, it's going to be really hard to have a crappy conversation. If you do those 5 things, it's more likely to go well. Which brings us to our last letter in the WIN process, which is the N, which is navigating resistance. Anyone know who Danny Meyer is? Anyone know who Danny Meyer is? Some knows. He's a restaurateur. Shake Shack? Shake Shack? Yeah, that's his place. He has a lot of restaurants. He started building restaurants in New York, lots of famous ones. But then the one that everyone knows him for now is Shake Shack. And he wrote a really great book about service and management called Setting the Table. So if you're a manager or a leader in any way, it's a great book to read. And one of the concepts he shares in this book is really relevant to navigating resistance in boundary setting. So imagine for a second that all of you just, imagine in your mind's eye that you're a manager of a restaurant. And in this restaurant, there are bare wooden tables everywhere in the restaurant. And one of the standards for the restaurant is that the salt and pepper shakers go in the middle of the table. On all the tables, the salt and pepper shakers go right in the middle of the table. And your job as manager is to make sure that every table in the restaurant at all times has the salt and pepper shakers in the middle of the table. And everyone else's job in the building is to constantly be moving the salt and pepper shakers somewhere else. Your job, get the salt and pepper shakers in the middle of the table, every table, all the time. Everyone else's job to move them other places, to lose the salt and pepper shakers, to forget to put them on in the first place, to put them not exactly center in the table. And your job, as Danny Meyer puts it, is to offer everyone constant, gentle pressure for the way you'd like it to be done. So what that means, if I'm the restaurant manager running around the restaurant and I see Dave over there who forgot to put the salt and pepper shakers on, I'll be like, hey, Dave, just a quick reminder, salt and pepper shakers right over here. They need to go in the middle of the table. Okay, great. 5 minutes later, I see Dave again. He put them on the table, but they're not in the middle. I go over, hey, Dave, hey, just another reminder. These salt and pepper shakers go in the middle. I think you put them over here on the side, just back in the middle. Does that make sense? Great, thanks. Guess what happens the next time Dave does it? Sorry to pick on you, Dave. I'm sure you get it right? I go back again, constant, it's gentle, and it's pressure, right? I think this is what navigating resistance looks like in setting boundaries. This is every time Lucy shows up for that meeting, and it is, if we agree to 2 after, she shows up at 3 after, be like, hey, Lucy, you did a really great job. It's only 3 after, which is much better than it's been, but we agreed to 2 after. So just a reminder, next meeting, if you could try and make it by 2 after, that'd be awesome. Next meeting comes. Hey, Lucy, you did it. It was so close. We're still 4 minutes after. We said 2 after. I'm not mad. I just want to reflect back. That's what we agreed to. Anything I can do to help you do that next time? It's constant, gentle pressure. And then obviously the question you're all thinking in your mind, well, when do you stop? When is enough? And that's up to you, right? If you have given constant gentle pressure and you're not interested in that anymore, the cost for you of giving that constant gentle pressure is cost more than it's worth it to maintain this relationship. You get to break up with whoever you want. If you set the boundary, having the candid conversation, you've given them constant gentle pressure over time, and this is someone who can't treat you how you want to be treated, then you get to decide when it's time to walk away and decide that that relationship isn't worth investing in. I'm not here to be the boss of you. You're all adults. You get to decide. But I would say at some point, if someone just can't show up for you in the way that you want to be treated, and I'll say this is maybe exaggerated to make a point, but that starts to be the definition of an abusive relationship, right? Is someone who continually treats you in a way that you don't want to be treated, and you just put up with it. You just persist, even though it hurts you and costs you something. And again, the example I'm giving here of Lucy being a few minutes late, I wouldn't necessarily call that an abusive relationship, but you get the point, is that that's the direction we're heading in, and none of us deserve to be in relationships or we can't be treated the way we want to be treated, at least most of the time. Yeah. So constant gentle pressure is the N in this 3-step process. So as a reminder, the 3 things are: 1, write down your needs through some journaling, some great personal inquiry, get that clear about what you want to ask for. Number 2 is have a candid conversation. Just initiate that candid dialogue about, this is how I want to be treated, with all the things that I listed. And the third one is navigating the resistance by using some constant gentle pressure to make sure people really are coming back in line and treating you how you want to be treated. So some takeaways before we go into our breakout rooms is this: setting boundaries requires courage, it requires vulnerability, it requires candor, right? This is not an easy thing to do, or I wouldn't need to have created a 1-hour workshop about it. And there wouldn't be dozens and dozens of books and classes on it. It's something very few of us are ever taught, but it's a really important skill to learn, regardless of what your life looks like right now. This is something that can apply in work, can apply in marriages, casual relationships, friendships, certainly in families, right? So these kinds of skills are important. We also talked about how being an always yes person or an always no person is a false choice. We really want to aim for a balanced approach so that when there's something requested of us, our time, energy, expertise, emotion, that we consider it in its context each time and decide whether or not we're going to give ourselves in each moment, instead of defaulting to an always yes or always no posture. And the third thing I want to leave you with is using the 3-step win process, right, which we just went over, as your kind of roadmap for what this can look like. Yeah. Any questions about that? Great. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to break you into some breakout rooms in a minute. And this, you're going to be in groups of maybe 2 or 3. Hopefully, for those of you who don't have video on, hopefully you can at least turn your audio on. I'll put you in groups of 3 so that if there's someone who can't talk, you can at least have a conversation with someone. And I want you to write down these 2 questions to talk about. One is, what is the most important boundary you can set for your self-care right now? And maybe the same one as you wrote down earlier. It might be a different one. And the second question I want you to answer is, how will you apply what we just learned? How will you apply what we just learned? What in what I said was useful? Was it parts of the candid conversation? Was it about writing down your needs? Was it about the constant gentle pressure? What about what we just discussed can you immediately apply to trying to set that boundary for self-care? Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can put you in breakout rooms. Any questions about what I'm asking you to do? Not seeing any questions. Yeah. I'm going to put you in these breakout rooms for about 5 or 6 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Yeah. And in that breakout room, I want you to share with each other, what is the most important boundary you can set for your self-care right now? And 2, what from what we just learned do you think you can apply? Like, what can you actually use from what we covered today that might be useful to you? So it's 45 minutes after the hour now. We'll come back at 50 minutes after the hour. The breakout rooms are open. You should be in groups of 2 or 3. And let me see, Dave, I put you in one as well. Lucy, let me see if you're in one. No, you're not in one, but I can. So go have fun in your breakout rooms. They're going to be open right now, and I'll see you in about 5 minutes. Have so much fun. Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for the other group to return. Just be a few more minutes. And by minutes, I mean a few more seconds.
How was your talk?
It went well. All good on my end.
That's great. How about you, Vicki? Good. I think I heard, I saw your mouth. I read your lips. It was good. Yeah. Awesome. Here comes everybody. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back. Who wants to share just one observation or insight from your conversation? No wrong answers here. What came up for you? Who wants to share something they heard or they said that stood out to them in that breakout room? Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
I think we agreed that coming to a conversation like that more prepared, so writing it down beforehand. I know personally when I approach a conversation that I may be trying to get to set some boundary, I usually do it in the moment, and I'm already emotionally kind of at a level. And so then if that's coming off and then immediately I get defensiveness back, and it's probably because I pushed too hard too fast. And then I think you're asking permission, like, is this a good time? Is, when you get the yes, that changes things a lot, and it just changes the mood.
Yeah. Well said, Dave. I think that's awesome. And what a great observation, right? We all know intuitively that our emotions are contagious, right? What I mean by that is we always say like, oh, that person walks in the room and just ruins the mood. It's because their emotions are contagious. You also know those people, oh, when that person walks into a room, they just light up a room, right? Their feelings are contagious. And so what Dave is saying here is if I'm in a crappy attitude or I'm mad or I'm really disappointed about something, and I come to a conversation trying to then talk from that point of view, someone's going to feel that emotion from me, and it's going to elicit some kind of reaction, defensiveness, equal frustration or anger, right? And so we want to both be at a place where we're prepared and give consent to be in a conversation like this. Yeah, well said, Dave. Any other observations from the conversation? Did I see your hand before, Ruth, or are you just, no? She's like, no, I didn't want to see, no. Jennifer, yeah, go ahead.
And that boundaries can be really, really difficult with family.
Yeah. What makes it so for you, Jennifer?
It's hard to have boundaries with your mom, right?
100%. Yeah, that's true. And I think that a lot of that is because we have these kind of built-in, what I'll call kind of like limiting beliefs or fixed mindsets about our family. Well, that's just the way Grandpa is, right? That's just the way crazy Aunt Susie is, right? I have plenty of crazy Aunt Susies in my life, so I know it, right? Or frankly, what I hear a lot from people these days is like, we just know that that's the way Uncle Joe is going to act. He's always going to have those few extra drinks and say something embarrassing. And so we feel like we can't confront that because it's just the way it is. And those are things that start with addressing in ourselves. It's like, okay, well, Michael, what led you to believe that that's just the way it is? Why am I accepting that? It's not working for me. In fact, every time Uncle Joe comes to my house and gets drunk and breaks something, I'm really upset by that. Every time Uncle Joe has too many drinks and says something really embarrassing to my friends, that really costs me something, right? Like, I don't deserve to be treated that way. Even if it's my uncle, my mother, my grandfather, it doesn't matter. Right? I deserve to say something about it and at least try, right? And with families, you might be willing to try longer and harder than with other people you're less invested in. But I think, what I hope you get out of this workshop is at the very least, try. At the very least, write down your thoughts and take that first step. If you're not even going to have the candid conversation, at least write it down and journal about it. Yeah. Or if you've tried to set a boundary, try and just use some constant gentle pressure. Just have some reminders once in a while. But even if you don't take away all 3 steps, you can just use one of them and they'll still be a useful step in the right direction. That being said, I know we only have a few more minutes. And for those of you who have to leave right at 7 o'clock, I just want to make sure I take the time right now to say thank you so much. for being here. Lucy's going to send you the slide deck so you have all those notes in one place. If you wind up having questions after this, you can direct them to Lucy. She'll send them to me in email. I can answer your questions that way. I don't have a hard stop right at 7 o'clock my time. So if anyone wants to stick around for an extra few minutes and ask questions to me personally, I'm happy to stick around. But I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. And if you have to leave, thank you so much for being here. But I'm going to stick around for a few minutes and answer anyone's questions that has them. So does anyone, yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? It can be about this or frankly, anything. Yeah, Lucy.
What about with kids?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, well, I mean, the research that I've seen shows that kids really get this. They don't have a lot of the same fixed ideas and fixed beliefs that we all do. They understand that they want to be treated a certain way, and they're not afraid to ask for it. At least the kids that I've come in contact with. And so kids really understand setting boundaries. And I think this is a skill they can learn early and often. And one of the things you can start with, kids are really good at mimicking language. Right? This is how they learn to speak, in fact, right? Is listening to us. So if you can teach them how to have conversations, even something like getting consent in a conversation, teaching a kid to say, hey, I want to talk to you about something, Dad. Is now a good time? Can you imagine what a game changer that would be if you had a kid who asked you if now is a good time to talk? And that's a skill that stays with them for life and really helps them have candid conversations and set boundaries. So I think kids are great at this. If you can teach a kid this, they'll probably learn it faster than you. They'll be more comfortable. They're also not afraid to look silly as much as adults are. So they're not afraid to experiment and try things. So I say, by all means, include kids in this, both setting boundaries by using these skills with kids and teaching kids how to set their own boundaries and asking for what they need using these same skills. So yes. Great question, Lucy. What else? Any other questions? Thanks so much, Ruth. Any other questions? Nothing from Dave. How about you, Vicky, Teresa, Mary Beth, Jennifer? Any other questions? No.
Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Lucy, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. And this is being recorded. And like Michael said, we have the slides. So we will be sending it to you all and
Awesome.
talking about it at the gym and possibly finding a book maybe that we can all read.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your week. Stay cool if you're somewhere hot. And, we'll be talking again soon, maybe. Have a good week. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.